But I'm very, very excited to be here today and super excited to be talking about this topic in particular because I know that it is a very important topic to researchers, well, UX people in general, and also like specifically right now, with everything that's gone on. I hope that one day, like, I don't have to preface my talks with everything that's going on in the UX world, and we can just go back to a normal, like, hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to my talk. But I know that there is a lot going on. So I hope that this conversation helps with anything that you're thinking about when it comes to measuring impact and tracking your impact as a user researcher, or just a UX person in general, because I know that that can be a tricky subject. So let's shed some light on that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I just want to confirm that everybody can see my screen. Yeah, cool. Perfect. So we are going to be talking all about measuring user research impact in several different ways today. So whether you're, I'm trying to cover it from several different angles to make sure that everybody can walk away with something to do today. That is my goal. But before we dive in, I'm Nikki. The cute dog is Poncho. He is literally lying right there. He loves to bark, so I apologize in advance if he does. Unfortunately, he's an unstoppable force when he barks. Yes, I hope he's not going to feature in this, but I never know. Aside from Poncho, I have been a user researcher for a decade now, which is kind of scary to say, but here we are, decading it up. I've worked in B2B, B2C, B2B2C companies, all the way from tiny startups to very large corporations, and done some consultancy and freelancing. Within that, I was a hiring manager for about 3 years, and now I run my own company mentoring others in user research, and I also do some consultancy as well. I'm a huge fan of Pokemon and World of Warcraft, also obsessed with Stephen King, and I currently live in the Channel Islands in Jersey. So if you want to see very cute cows, I recommend looking up Jersey cows because they're super, super cute, and I see them all the time. So yeah, that is my little nugget for Jersey. So let's dive into the topic today. So what we're going to touch upon today is what impact actually means when it comes to user research, ways to think about measuring impact internally and externally, and a framework for tracking impact over time. So what I said earlier about wanting to come at this from multiple angles is I know that not everybody can measure impact in the same ways when it comes to their role or their organization. So I really wanted to give you a few different ways that I have personally measured impact in the past and how I teach other researchers or UX people to measure impact depending on their role, their organization, and all the wonderful constraints that can come alongside measuring impact in our kinds of roles. So, what does impact actually mean, right? So, what is impact when we actually think about it? Because we get buzzy with impact, right? Impact's a buzzword. It's like actionable insights, right? What are these things? So for me, what I did is kind of define what impact meant to me. And this actually really helped me with understanding how to track impact. So if you're sitting there saying, how am I supposed to track impact? What I would recommend doing, and this was a huge game changer for me, is sitting down and saying, how do I define it? And then going a step further and saying, how do I define it at my current role, given all of the constraints that I might have, given the organizational structure, given the product, right? So my first action item for you all would be to actually sit down and think about at one point, what does impact mean to you at your organization and within your context? So for me, impact is when user research influences a person or their way of thinking. So this could be like a stakeholder, right? And their way of thinking. It could be a coworker. It could be anybody at your organization and how they think about something, as well as a general organization. So influencing an organization and their goals, right? So this could be looking at innovation as well. So impacting how an organization thinks about structuring themselves or what their vision might be or what they want to achieve in the future. It influences a product experience. So this gets really into like the UX part of it, right? So we're actually influencing an experience that people might have on a product. Direction of strategy, right? So looking into how an organization or how teams or how individuals think about strategy, right? So what is our strategy? And then finally, for me, it's a team or a team's processes. And this one was very interesting because I never actually thought about the impact that user research could have on processes. And it wasn't until I was working at an organization and I did kind of like, it was almost a mix between a customer journey map and a service blueprint, because we didn't quite go all the way out to a service blueprint and we didn't quite hone in all the way to a customer journey map. But I was able to understand that, hey, user research can actually impact how departments function with each other, right? And so that was another really great way that I kind of understood, okay, user research can actually have a very big impact on teams' processes and how they think about things and how they work together, right? So I'm here to tell you that it's not all about product metrics. Hey, because I know that's very hard to sometimes tie our impact to product metrics. I will talk about them because what's an impact presentation without talking about product metrics? But we will talk about other ways to influence and impact others. So how I kind of broke impact down was into two separate buckets. So I looked at external impact and then internal impact. So for the external side, for me, that meant looking at things like product metrics or strategic change for a product or an organization. So these are things that are kind of like externally facing. So more user experience focused impact. So that goes really into that product metrics part, really into like, hey, how is the organization maybe changing their strategy? How are we innovating? How are we changing our product? Right. So that to me was kind of like this external impact. And then the internal, for me, meant looking into teams and processes and how you can also kind of help your organization shape how they think about people, about the product, right? So it's much more focused on your colleagues, actually, and your stakeholders. And the teams and departments within your organization, right? So it's like almost you could almost think about it of like customer facing impact, like product facing impact, and more like organizational facing impact. And the reason that I put these two aside is because I myself struggled so much with like product metrics and being like, on my resume being like, and then my research uplifted conversion rate by 20%. And it's like, okay, yeah, like part of my, like I was part of that, right? I was a piece of the pie, right? But I wasn't solely responsible. If user researchers were solely responsible for uplifting conversion rate by 20%, I think we would be very coveted. But it kind of confused me as to how to demonstrate impact outside of product metrics, which is why I kind of separated these two types of impact. So let's first go through external impact because I feel like it's more, more widely known and a little bit more spoken about. And then we'll get to that more juicy, at least I find it more exciting, that internal side, because I really think that user research can be used. I'm not sure if anybody else is familiar with, I think it's industrial organizational psychology, right? So it's IO psychology. It's a degree that you can get a postgraduate degree, and it's all about like working within an organization and how an organization works, and like impacting teams and processes. And I think user research can also actually do that super duper well. And that's where that internal side comes in. So let's first look at this internal, more customer facing business and product metric side. So first thing, what are business metrics, right? So, because it's again, like, I feel like we have all these buzzwords and we're just using them. And everybody's like, yeah, sure. But we're kind of like, question mark. There's like a reel that I saw where it's like, what are KPIs? Like this person's like in a meeting being like, what are KPIs actually? Because we just are like, yeah, sure, KPIs are important. So business metrics are how I define it, are what your company or organization is striving to achieve, right? It's what we're trying to get done as a greater organization. They're dependent on a company's goals, what the company wants to do in the future, where they want to go. like really like high level execs are looking into these things. I mean, it depends on the size of your organization. I mean, I was at one point, I was like kind of like mid-level user researcher, and I worked at a 20-person company, so I was actually in, like part of these conversations, which was terrifying. But it's usually determined by people on like the C-suite, or people who are usually a little bit further removed from research. And they sit within OKRs and KPIs usually, but you can also just call them goals, right? I like to just call them goals because everybody calls them different things, and goals is a relatively common way to describe the things that we're trying to accomplish. So that's how I define business metrics. It's kind of like where your company is trying to go. And I am a huge fan of the pirate metrics. The reason that they're called pirate metrics is the R, AARRR, which is always super embarrassing to do. The main metrics that we look at are acquisition, activation, retention, referral, and revenue. These are just super common, super well known in the business world, right? So acquisition is getting the customers in, activating is kind of like converting them into actual customers. Retention is keeping them, referral is kind of loyalty and making them advocates and getting other people in via your customers, and revenue is, well, what we all really care about when it comes to businesses. So all of these kind of funnel into each other, and they're a really great way to start if you're unfamiliar with business metrics. Like the pirate metrics are a great place to start. And I have linked in the resources for this presentation, an article that I wrote on how I've used user research to impact pirate metrics. So you can also read through that if that's something that you're interested in. But these are a really, really great place to start. It's where I started because I knew nothing about business and I was scared of KPIs and OKRs and all these weird sounding things. And it really helped me with just delineating, okay, these are like the steps people usually take to then get to revenue, which is what businesses care about. So how does user research actually use business metrics? So how can we take our work, right, and say, hey, this is relevant for business? Because I know I struggled with, especially at first, saying, it's important for us to speak to our customers. And then somebody would turn around and be like, why? And I was like, because it is like, obviously it's important because we need to know them and we need to understand them. And it's like my stakeholders for like the first time in their lives decided to use the 5 why technique on me, right? And they were like, why is it important? And I'm like, oh, because it is, like so I had to eventually get to a point where I could articulate how user research kind of ties into these business metrics and how user research ties into the business in general and why it's important. Because I found myself quite frequently struggling with almost, I hate using the phrase proving the value, because it just feels like we're already at a disadvantage, because we have to prove something. But like it did help me. I struggled with saying like, this is why user research is important in a larger context, like outside of like, we need to understand our customers, duh. Right. So I did struggle with that. And I knew that I had, if I wanted to get like a seat at the table, if I wanted to do more bigger studies, get more budget, like have user research impact the wider organization, I had to figure out how to tie these two things together. And I will give a few concrete examples in just a second to make it a little bit more clear, including an example from one of the studies that I actually did at an organization. But how I've used business metrics and user research together is I use them as success metrics to measure after a study. So one of the biggest pieces of advice that I have moving forward, if you don't do it already, define success metrics. So make sure that at the beginning of your research studies, you are tracking something. And you might need help with this, and that is okay because you are not necessarily in charge of understanding the business. So relying on people like product managers, like product analysts, or other people who might be more familiar with the business and what the business is trying to achieve, that's okay to do that. I know it's scary. I was scared because I used to be scared of product managers. and asking them questions and asking them for help because I was like, I don't want to appear like I don't know how to do my job, right? So what I ended up doing was trying to understand, hey, from like this like backwards way, what metrics are important to you, team? Right? So like what kind of metrics are you looking at? Like what kind of either product metrics, business metrics are you trying to move as a team? And that helped me with understanding what they were trying to do, right? So for instance, I worked at a travel company, and our customer acquisition cost was scarily high and not sustainable, right? And so I went to the acquisition team and I was like, hey, listen, like I want to understand what are the things that you are trying to achieve in terms of metrics. And they said reducing the customer acquisition cost, but also increasing acquisition, right? Because we weren't getting enough people in, right? Even if we retained the people, it wasn't sustainable enough revenue. And I was like, great, okay, so we're looking to reduce customer acquisition costs. We're looking to increase acquisition. If I'm thinking about those, what kind of research can I do that could actually help us with moving those metrics, right? So I'm tracking those and I'm using those metrics to point me in the direction of a potential new study, right? So for acquisition, for instance, understanding why are people coming to us? Why are they not coming to us? So understanding that whole like what is the journey? What are the triggers that get people to us? What are the other things that they're looking at in addition? What are the steps that they're going through so that we can understand why people are coming, and then also understanding where's the missing link between the acquisition and the activation. Why aren't we turning them into customers? Why are they just leaving us? Right. So like being able to say, hey, this is a success metric that I'm looking at and tracking for the study, and I'm going to base my study on this. You are automatically like, I was like, I'm going to do this. And like the CEO, like the entire C-suite was like, yay, that makes sense. And I'm like, cool, we're on the same page. That's great. So like really get into understanding what your teams are looking to try and achieve when it comes to business metrics, and do not be scared to be like, what does that mean? Right? We all need to learn, and it's only fair that we all give each other the space to learn. So definitely ask the questions and find somebody safe that you can ask. If you don't feel safe asking directly a product manager, maybe take what they say to you and go to somebody else and say, hey, person, can we work through this together, right? Or invite the product manager to a larger group of people to try and work through it together. Right. I don't mean to be slamming product managers right now, by the way. There are a lot of really great product managers out there. I just know that sometimes it's an interesting relationship. But it can happen with anybody. So try and find those safe spaces to be able to ask questions. So another way is that we can actually answer specific business questions with user research. Like, so why are people not using these features? Why are they dropping out of the checkout funnel? So there are oftentimes questions that our stakeholders have that can be directly impact the business, that we can try and hone our methodologies and approaches to answer those questions directly, which gets you lots of brownie points when you're able to do that. And then one other thing is, additionally, kind of like the questions that we see above, why are people dropping out of the checkout funnel, right? That's a business problem. Users aren't like, why are we dropping out of the checkout funnel, right? Users don't care why they're dropping out of the checkout funnel. They are just dropping out because your experience sucks for some reason, right? Or something bad is happening, right? So we don't necessarily just answer why are people dropping out of the checkout funnel, because that doesn't serve our users, it serves the business. But we can start there to start to create a more user-centric research study. Right. So if we start with why are people dropping out of the checkout funnel, we can easily spin that to say, hey, what are the pain points? Like let's explore the pain points behind the checkout funnel process, because then what we're doing is we're having a user-centric view on it, but also answering that business question. Because if we understand the pain points that are coming with this experience from our users, we can solve that for the users. And inherently, it's really funny, when we solve things for the users, we solve things for the business. It's just that stakeholders don't get that quite yet. But it is pretty one-to-one ratio. So start with understanding the business problem and then translate that into a user research study. So some common business metrics to research goals, because like I have a lot of stakeholders who come to me and they're like, we want to fix conversion rate. And I'm like, okay, right. I don't think users care about our conversion rate, believe it or not. But there are a lot of times where stakeholders will come to you with a problem and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I got really frustrated about it for a while, but then I was like, hey, they're just coming to me because they have a problem and this is the scope. This is where they're coming from. Let me meet them because just like I want to learn, they want to learn. And we all need that space. So these are some of the ways that I take business metrics and I've translated them into research goals. Some of them are usability focused. So conversion rate might be a checkout flow and understanding the usability behind it. You are going to be very surprised at the number of times that I've actually avoided doing user research by saying, hey, let's do QA and let's look at some heuristic evaluations. And we actually found all the problems without talking to users. But don't tell anybody that because then we're back at square one with convincing people to do user research. So we also have things like retention rate, which is super hard, like churn, right? So understanding why people are leaving, what's missing, what are the unmet needs, customer lifetime value. So evaluating the overall value of a product or a service brings to people. So there are a lot of different ways that we can turn these business metrics into research goals. It's just you understanding where your stakeholder is coming from and translating that into a more user-centric kind of problem. Because again, our users don't care about our retention rate. So as an example, I was working at a meal kit company and the business problem. So this is very, very common with like literally every meal kit out there. After an initial discount to the boxes, I'm not sure if any of you have tried meal kits before and you're like, hey, we get like 1,000% off our first 5 boxes or like our first 3 boxes, right? And then suddenly you're like, oh, wow, after that 1,000% discount, this actually costs $1,000 for each box. Maybe I should cancel. So we had something like that happening. So the business came to me saying, you know, we're crap at retention, right? We're not doing a good job. We're actually spending a lot of money getting customers and then they're leaving as soon as their discounts are done, right? So I was like, okay, people don't care that they're canceling. So let's kind of make this more user-centric. Let's understand why people are canceling and look at their unmet needs and pain points, right? So we're turning it back to the user and we're saying, yes, we're going to understand why people are canceling so that we can help the business, but we need to understand it from a user-centric perspective. So we looked into why people were canceling their subscription after the discount trial and looked into their unmet needs and pain points. So we did this primarily with one-on-one interviews because the whys, right? We need to understand the whys through the qual, and then we followed up with some surveys. And the success metric that we decided to track for this is to a decrease in cancellation rate after a discount. And actually, we looked into fewer 1-star ratings. So that was actually another indicator of success for us that I figured out after speaking with the team is we had a lot of 1-star ratings that were also impacting acquisition, right? Because this goes back to kind of like that acquisition. It's a little bit acquisition activation-y, but the 1-star ratings were impacting both acquisition and activation. So these were the success metrics that we ended up looking into. And so if you can see here, like I tracked these from the get-go, like that was like before the project started, I was like, this is where we are at our cancellation rate after discount. And this is how many 1-star ratings we are so that I could track it after we did our research as well. And once we made changes so that we could see how those metrics moved so that I could say, hey, here's exactly how user research impacted. Yes, we're a slice of the pie. We didn't do the design. I didn't do the design of the product managing things, the dev and anything, but this is how user research played its part in helping to decrease cancellation rate and up our review rating, right? So then I could go and say, hey, here's a case study, right? Because that's what we also care about. Here's my case study for my next employer that I'm interviewing for, and I can say my exact impact. So it's not only important for you to be able to track your impact within an organization for things like promotions or pay rises, but also for when you leave, because everybody leaves and goes to new places and explores new things. So when you leave, you have all of this information. So let's talk now. I'm just checking the time really quickly. Jen, can you remind me what time we're going until for this?
You're about 30 minutes in.
Great.
So it's noon, 6 o'clock your time.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Let's talk about internal impact now and looking at that other side. So as we talked about, internal impact is looking more at the internal mechanisms of teams, of processes, of organizations, right? So we can see how our user research practice is actually impacting an organization and impacting processes and impacting teams, right? So this is, for me, this was like a completely new way of looking at impact. And it was really, really interesting when I started understanding how my work could help other departments outside of just like, hey, let's look at the UX and fix the UX of a product. So just as a quick rundown, these are some KPIs, and I'm going to go slightly in depth for a few of these. But these are a few KPIs that I have used for my research teams or for as well other departments. So you'll see things like decreased amount of time from request to research. So when somebody requested something from me to like when the research was actually being done or finished, right? But you also see things like decreased customer support calls. That's awesome if we can decrease customer support calls. You can also look at things like decreased dev rework, right? So if devs do work and then we find out, hey, this experience is not great, they have to rework that experience. So you can actually track the decrease or the hopefully not increase, the decrease of rework that devs have to do on certain projects as well. So there are different ways that we can kind of like look at impacting departments. You can also look at things like marketing, like customer acquisition cost. So decreasing customer acquisition cost. So yeah, there are plenty of ways that you can impact other departments. But the reason that this is so heavy on like research mechanics is because this is the easiest stuff for us to track because we are the researchers and we are impacting these things. So if you're just new to internal impact, start small for yourself, and also start with tracking some things that you can actually make a difference with. So for instance, number of usability tests run. So I actually like to decrease this number because I always end up doing too many usability tests, right? So I actually look at decreasing usability tests as a way to show increased user research maturity in organizations. So this is often paired with decreasing the number of usability tests and increasing the number of generative research sessions, because that indicates to me we're doing higher impact research, right? We also have here amount of time from research to research. So the amount of time from a request or an idea for a research project to when we can actually do the research or when we actually complete the research. This can point out areas that you can streamline. Recruitment, let's say, creating templates for people to fill out, because the more research you can get done, so the shorter amount of time, the better, right? Because you're doing more and you're impacting more teams. The number of research requests, this also looks at user research maturity at an organization. So how many research requests are you getting in? I like to generally look at increasing these. You could look at decreasing these if you are getting too many. This could also be an indicator that you use to your manager to show that you're over capacity, right? So some of these metrics can also help you with having tough conversations with managers, like, hey, we need another team member, or hey, we need to like work on my workload, right? Number of usability issues fixed. I actually love this metric so much because this shows the ongoing impact of research. So yes, you're doing more usability tests or you're doing fewer, but what's actually happening? How many issues are actually getting fixed, right? So you can look at over 3 to 6 months, how many issues you found within usability tests that have been fixed over time. And that shows a really concrete impact there. And then number of generative sessions run, as I said, generative research indicates higher user research maturity, generally speaking, not always. So looking into how many of these are being run is a really, really great metric to look at. And if you look at both these and usability tests, you can go to your manager and you can say, we're doing too many of this, let's do this. So again, these are really great ways to have conversations with your manager if you're having problems with workload or you're thinking like you're doing too many usability tests. And then I love this one as well, number of features from user research on the roadmap, right? So how many features have come out? So ideally, generative research turns into something like an ideation session, right? So which turns into usability testing, which turns into new features, new products, new services. So how many of these things are getting pulled all the way through your user research in a given time frame? Be very generous with your time frame because these things take time. Don't look at it as like, how many new features can I have pulled from user research in 1 month? Unless your team works really fast and you're in an incredible team that's just like obsessed with user research and can do everything at once. Look at like 6 months, even consider looking at a year if you want to, but you can look 3, 6, 9 months, right, to track this. So here is an example from one of the companies that I worked at. So we wanted to understand the impact of user research on the teams in organization. So our key results within our team were to decrease the amount of time to research because it was taking way too long, increase the number of generative research sessions run, and increase the number of insights on our roadmap, right? So we wanted to bring the insights into the roadmap. And that was very, very important to us. So we went through amount of time to research. We decreased that by recruitment agencies, hiring another researcher and creating templates. Number of generative research sessions, we saved 60% of capacity for generative research, and we started a continuous research program. And then for the number of insights on the roadmap, we actually embedded researchers within teams. Then they went to the planning meetings and we consistently shared insights in ways that got people excited about putting them on their roadmap. So that's a way that we kind of took these internal KPIs and turned them into things that we could track to show our impact. So really, really quickly, I'm just going to show a framework, a quick impact framework that you can use to start thinking about how to track this over time. Now, I will say that tracking impact, it's a job. Like it takes time. You have to dedicate time to it. It's not as simple as we all probably wish that it was. But I recommend, so what I did is when I was on my own, so as a solo user researcher, I updated my impact framework, I want to say once a month. And when I was on a team with other researchers, we updated our impact framework once every 2 weeks together. It's obviously more difficult when you're on a team to keep track of these things, but there are ways that you can share this documentation and make sure that you're coming together to update it every so often on a cadence that makes sense for you. But just like I always recommend, like update your resume and your case studies every single quarter because you never know what can happen, right? Do the same with your impact as well. So tracking that every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, every month, whatever feels best for you and whatever cadence works best. So what I put in my impact framework is the impact metric or description, the study or source, the researcher or researchers, research type, level of support, impact type, impact level and scale, and area. So really quickly, I'll go through these. The impact metric or description is the metric that you are looking at. So it could be external or internal. So you could look at increased stakeholder satisfaction, increase in usage data. You can also use, and this was very important to me, qualitative comments from stakeholders, like almost like using testimonials for your research. So if a stakeholder says to you, we use the insights to move forward with the next step of iteration, that is a tangible impact that you had. So don't forget to like take quotes from stakeholders as impact. I know that might sound a little bit weird because I didn't know how to do this at first, but like I literally used like almost like testimonials from my stakeholders as impact and tracking impact. The study or source is like either the study that this came from or the source that it came from. This just helps you with remembering where that impact, like which study that impact had to do with. So this is a mechanism just for yourself to remember what actually happened, the researcher or researchers that were involved in the study as well. The research type. So this is how I started to understand how much evaluative versus generative research we were doing. So I always put in the type of research that I was doing. So like, was I doing card sorting? Was I doing usability tests? Was it one-on-one interviews? Was it this or that or the other thing? So it can also help indicate if you need more to expand your toolkit potentially, and if you're just doing the same research over and over again. So level of support, I personally use different levels of support with teams. I have a high, medium, low level of support depending on the maturity of the team and their capability with running projects. So if you were able to achieve impact with like a low to medium level of support, then that means that you can maybe look into other projects and look into helping other teams, or look into supporting teams with other types of user research. And then the impact type is what the research activity led to. So did it lead to something like a change or an iteration in the product? Did you optimize a process? Did you change the product strategy? Right. So this allows you to see the really like the exact type of impact your research is having at the organization. Right. So for example, a research team that's been trying to impact product iterations might try to move on to influencing product strategy next, right? So this also tells you what the next step could be for you. So if you're doing a lot of research where you're just changing and iterating the product, maybe your next step could be to like actually change the product strategy. And then impact levels or scale. I use this to kind of think about almost that first slide that we talked about of who we can actually impact. So individuals, teams, cross-departmental, organizational, community, maybe your internal research team. So it shows how widespread your impact is. And then the area or team. So this is like, what team did you actually impact, or teams, right? Was it like I impacted like the acquisition and the activation team with some of my research? And this just helps showed again, like how widespread my impact could be for just even one study, right? And it looks if you're only doing research for like one team at a time, and then you can start to think, oh, if I'm only doing it for one team at a time, is there a way for me to broaden the scope so that I'm doing research that impacts multiple teams at once? And then any relevant links to the research, like the research plan, roadmap, report, insights. This just gives you additional context, and any notes or comments as well. So this is what it looks like blank. Which is never fun. So if you see here, there's all of the different components that I mentioned. And then this is something that I have actually put together. So if you'll see here, there's a variety of different types of impact metrics. So time to research was decreased from 10 to 5 days, right? So that's time to research initiative. It was me. The research type was internal. The level of support didn't matter because it was internal. I wasn't helping any teams. I looked at optimizing processes at the product team scale. It impacted all of the product teams, right? So that together just shows literally everything that happened within that initiative that was worth tracking impact on. And then we'll have here daily usage. There was a feature that we were looking for. And we were looking to increase usage of a certain feature from 5 to 20% on how to improve the onboarding experience and subsequent design changes. So this is more product-based, right? So it was about onboarding. It ended up being qualitative. I think it was one-on-one interviews. It was kind of like walk the store, one-on-one interviews plus a walkthrough. And then it led to this product change for the onboarding team. Right. You can also do something that I really highly recommend is I gave a presentation of how to engage better at a UX Insights conference, right? And I actually put that as a conference talk, and it impacted the community because like it's really cool to be able to talk about how you've impacted the community outside of your space as well, right? Then we have reduction in bugs. top 3 reasons for churn, and then stakeholder satisfaction. So we have a mix here of really different types of research that are both external facing, so more of the product facing, and then internal for more of the teams. And what this does is if you share this with your manager and you're like, I want a promotion, look at all the stuff that I've done, you've made their job really easy by showing this impact. This is also super great to be able to take away with you to say, hey, here are all the big achievements that I had, because this literally can go on your resume and then you can put it in your case studies, right? This is great for this is great for everything. It also is a wonderful mood booster. So if you're having a really crappy day and you look at this and you're like, this is why I'm a user researcher, I can now remember, right? But just what I recommend is starting to track these things over time, because it could be super, super helpful in just a variety of ways. Cool. So these are the resources that I have linked. So we have usability testing metrics, product analytics, the spreadsheet, and I put in a stakeholder satisfaction survey. I actually just realized that I didn't put the pirate metrics in here. So Jen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to update this as soon as we hop off, so that you can have the pirate metrics article in here as well to easily get to. And now questions or comments or concerns.
Yay. Thank you, Nikki. This has been great. We're also, you failed to mention, you have an awesome book out right now. So we're going to put a link in the chat to Nikki's book. I've read it. It's big, but it's not like scary big. I mean, it comes big, but the font's pretty big. So it's not like, oh, I'm never going to read this. It's really good. It's a fundamental awesome read. So I would highly recommend that. And then we're also going to put a link into your academy in the chat as well. So I know you're tight for time, so I'm going to go ahead and pop into. So we had lots of questions in the chat, so we're going to try to get through as many as we can in the next 13 minutes. So, but first, let's give Nikki like applause. Like, that was totally awesome, wasn't it? Yes, that was so good. Like, a lot of content there. So thank you, Nikki, for that. So great. All right, and yeah, if you want to put on your cameras, this is a great time, because now she can see you, and we love to see you smiling faces. So let's do that too. So we're gonna we'll check out the chat, and we'll put Nikki's book link to her book in there too. So Nikki, what do you do if your product stakeholders are only choosing to do a project because executive so and so said to do it? Happens a lot. What do you do about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's only so much we can do sometimes. So like there is like the reality that we work within teams, and teams work within larger teams, right? So if there is an executive who is determining all of the types of things that we should be doing, we could, if you feel comfortable, go directly to that executive and ask a little bit about the context. Whenever I'm for lack of a better way to say it, annoyed with projects coming from the top down, what I try and do is apply the same empathy that I feel towards, users to those people, to understand, okay, what is it that you're actually trying to accomplish? What is it that you're scared of? What is it that you're like worried about? Like, what's on the line for you? Because there's a reason that people say things and make these decisions and tell people to do other things. And it's usually because they are trying to achieve something that's very, very important to them, or their like livelihood, as like keeping their job. So I would do my best to try and understand why these projects are coming through and what we're hoping to achieve. And then as well, do my best to like then say, okay, I understand you want to do this project, but I'm concerned that it wouldn't lead to this outcome, right? So I hear that you want to do usability testing to understand deep mental models. This is why I don't think that will work, right? What I propose we do, not what I propose I do, what I propose we do, because we are a collective, is this approach. How does that feel? How can we make that work? Right? So how can we make one-on-one interviews work instead? Oh, you're scared about time? right? Because we don't have enough time to do one-on-one interviews. Okay, let's narrow down our segment and do fewer one-on-one interviews to get this like first go at it, and then we can do more later, right? So there's always ways to like try and collaborate and work alongside people by bringing them into the fold and saying, how can we tackle this together? Right. So that's what I would do, is understand why these are coming down, what we're actually trying to achieve, and try and say, okay, I understand where we're coming from with wanting to do these usability tests. However, I'm scared that the outcome we won't get is we won't get the outcome we need. So I think we should do this. What do you think? How do we make this work? How together? Again, always pulling them in. How can we make this work together? Does that make sense? I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that does make a lot of sense. Thank you, Nikki, for that. Great
Yeah.
stuff. So how do you make a direct connection between research insights and business metrics when you have, especially when you have like a very big and complex product? Because it's hard to say, this is the question, we discovered this and this led to an increase in conversion rate. There's a lot of in between, right?
Yeah.
So what are some approaches or thoughts you have on how to make that direct connection?
So there isn't a direct connection. The thing is, so if you're concerned about the connection, so I have a lot of people come to me and say, I'm concerned about putting this on my resume because I'm going to look like I did this whole project by myself, when in fact there are 1,000 other people working on this, right? So like, I'm scared by saying that my user research increased conversion rate by 20% isn't fair, because I didn't do the design, I didn't do the dev work, I didn't do any of these other parts. I completely understand that. And I think that that's great that you are thinking about how we all collaborate as a greater good. But as a hiring manager, looking at your resume, if I see that, I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this person thought that they single-handedly changed the world of this organization with research. I understand that you are doing a piece of what happened, right? So like, you can't direct, like, unless you are also a dev, designer, a product manager, and everything in between, you can't draw a direct, like 100% direct link. You are part of the process, just like everybody else is, though, right? So product managers are also talking about how they've impacted business metrics. Designers are talking about that. Devs are talking about that. We're all talking about it with the understanding that we are a part of the greater process. I would never in my life penalize anybody for putting that in a case study or for putting that in a resume, especially a resume, because it's not like you can, for every single bullet point, say, and by the way, I collaborated with this, and this person for this, and this, and don't worry, I didn't do it alone. And I totally understand that I didn't do it alone. And I'm just part of the puzzle, right? But in your case study, if you talk through how you've collaborated with other people, that's where I understand that you also understand that it's a collaborative process. But it's literally impossible in an industry where we are all literally dependent on each other to tie direct things, like tie direct metrics from research to the business. It's literally impossible, and we all have to kind of be okay with that. And if somebody is sitting there judging you for putting that on your resume, then you do not want to work for them, because that is very, very unfair, because we're all of us are doing it, with the caveat of we all understand that we're a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah,
I
that's
hope that
fair.
that helps with that particular question.
Yeah, thank you for that,
Yeah.
Nikki. That totally
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of question and pointing out of your the toward the end, your chart. Was that done in Dovetail?
There's some in Dovetail. There's also a Google Sheet
Okay. Yeah, they
as
were kind
well.
of asking a little bit
Yes.
about
Yeah.
that, and a lot of people are very interested in the categories and tracking that. Like,
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about the speaking at conferences or into to internal teams, right? Those are great internal that's an internal metrics. That's really great.
Yeah.
So Nikki, do you have any guidance for lagging metrics? For example, someone who is conducting research on a product that may take many months, maybe years, to see the light of day.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on how to make an impact there?
Yeah, I mean, most of the metrics that we are tracking as researchers are lagging indicators and not leading indicators. Tim Herbig has a really great article, or maybe a few articles. Here, I'll put his name in the chat. Tim Herbig has really great stuff on leading versus lagging indicators, if that's something that you're new to. But lagging metrics are usually what we're looking at when it comes to user research. So seeing what the impact of our work has been. For things that don't see the light of day for many months or many years, it depends on what you're using the impact for, right? So if you're using the impact for things like a case study and you leave before the things are done, there's not much that you can do, unfortunately. But what you can do is you can talk about the success metrics that you want, like that you put at the beginning of the study, that you wanted to track from the beginning of the study, because that, to me, like again, like putting my hiring manager hat on, when I see somebody who's like, yeah, like I'm working, I actually worked with somebody on a product that was a physical product, and the iterations took like a year plus, right? And so when I was working with this person, though, they put in their success metrics at the beginning of the study, and that indicated to me that they were thinking about the impact that they were having, even if they couldn't necessarily tell me what that impact was because of the length of time that it took. It was just that thought and intention behind it, right? Of like saying, these are the success metrics that the team is looking at, right? And another thing that you can do is like check in with those success metrics. So if your team has done any of the smaller iterations, can you check in and see kind of like over time, like have they changed at all, even with smaller iterations, right? So continuously monitoring those metrics over time to see if they have changed, if your team does put out smaller iterations. And then I had one more point that is just completely crawled out of my head. Yeah, so I would say it's more about the success metrics that you define at the beginning, being an indicator that it's a lagging indicator, right? Or no, it's actually a leading indicator, that you think about these things, right? So I would recommend just going hard on the success metrics part. As again, as a hiring manager, I understand if you haven't stayed to see the impact, right? And again, this is why it's also important, like what other impact did you have on the organization? So just look at various types of impact that you've had on the organization, because those are probably things that are maybe more in your control that you can show that you've had impact on, like the time to research, or like the number of tests run, or the number of requests, or the number of workshops that you've run, right? So looking at those internal metrics as well.
Sounds good. I'm going to wrap up with one more question. I know you only have a few minutes, and I know you could speak for hours and hours on this. And there's a lot of great content in her book about this. I will say this too as well. How can you effectively communicate the value of UX research projects to product folks who are more interested in just implementation and getting it out the door? What are some tips to show the value of UX research?
Okay. So two things here. I will say the less encouraging one first. Sometimes you can't bang other people. Well, you probably shouldn't bang other people's head against the wall, because you will end up just banging your own head against the wall trying to bang theirs. So sometimes people just don't care. And I think we have to be okay with that, in the way that sometimes we just don't care about certain things, right? So we have to kind of understand that sometimes we could sit there and pitch the value of user research for 3.5 years to the same person, and they still don't care. I've worked with stakeholders just like that. And after a while, I had to say, okay, you just don't care. That's okay. Okay, fine. So we do have to understand the limitations that we have, and that it's not necessarily our job to convince everybody in the world to be the biggest fan of user research. Of course, it's important to us because, well, we're here. And we find it important, but that doesn't make it important to everybody else. So that is the less encouraging one, where it's like, maybe don't spend all of your time trying to do something that feels impossibly difficult to do. My other more, I guess, optimistic piece of advice for people who don't understand the value of user research, go about it in a different way by not trying to make them understand the value of research, but trying to help them. So literally being like, okay, let's put all of this aside. I'm not going to pitch this value. I'm not going to try and prove this to you and tell you how important it is to talk to customers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at you and say, how do we work together and how can I help support you in the work that you're doing day to day? Right. So instead of sitting there and trying to lecture them, because it's not fun to get lectured, no matter who you are, and it's something that I think we feel like we have to do as user researchers. At least I was taught, like, do that presentation once a month about the value of user research to all the newcomers, right? Or like just like shove this down people's throats about how important user research is, because we've got to have those presentations, right? And I'm not discounting those necessarily, but it's like, why don't we take the other approach and instead like say, okay, how do we work together in the terms of like, how can I support you in your day-to-day work? I'm not going to like sit here and pitch like, we need to do three one-on-one, like three generative research studies and this and this. It's like, okay, like let's just see what's the work you're doing, where are you struggling with your work, like where are your pain points as a stakeholder, and how can I support you, how can we collaborate, how can we work together to help you achieve your goal? Because user research is that support system where you're here to help the business and the teams achieve their goals. And of course we have goals that we want to achieve, but we are also here to help those teams, right? So like, how can I help you? How can I take work off your plate? How can I make your decisions easier? So I try and go, and I always preface this, and it's kind of annoying to preface it like this, but I always preface it kind of like of saying things like, hey, I'm not trying to make your life more difficult, right? I'm not here as a blocker. I'm not here just trying to like lecture you. I'm not here trying to tell you what to do. I'm here to help you, literally, as much as I can. So how can we do this together? And again, bringing them into the fold as much as we can. Doesn't always work, but it's a different way to try. And it's a more empathetic approach. And sometimes I know that I have gone into meetings where I'm trying to be more empathetic, but I'm screaming in my head because I'm so sick of being the empathetic one, right? But empathy breeds more empathy, usually. And so trying to have those conversations in that more caring and supportive way can also help people open up a little bit more.
Yeah,
So
I think that's great.
what I would, yeah.
Yeah, and also Nikki, building those relationships, right? Get to know them on the side, and then once you start to build those relationships, then they'll trust you a little bit more and they'll start to listen a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I was literally such great friends with a product manager. Like we were like so close, but the second we stepped into a meeting room together, we just like it felt impossible because they just didn't like user research and didn't believe in it. And I, as a user researcher, felt really upset about that, right? But like this, we could step out of the meeting room and be like, hey, you know. So like, and then eventually what we started to try and talk about is we started to try and say, okay, how do we make this relationship work for both of us? Because we're both trying to achieve goals and we both have to understand that we are both trying to do good things. It just blows my mind. We're all working for the same organization. Let's all just like put some stuff aside about what we believe in or not. It's like we don't need to bring beliefs into the workplace, and let's just see how we can collaborate in the best way that we can.
Yeah, that's a great way to wrap it up. Thank you so much. Everybody give Nikki another round of applause. This has been really a great talk. It's been
Thank you.
Totally awesome. So thank you so much. But just so you know, this part is what we call happy hour. No matter what time of day it is, you can have a cocktail or not. But even if it's coffee or water, that's totally fine. I'm only having iced tea, very uneventful. But what we do here is we take a few minutes for people to raise their digital hand. That should be something, if you can find it in Zoom, because there's a lot of controls. Raise your digital hand if you have a question, and then any one of us here from the group can help provide some answers or some insight. So does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Anyone here in the community?
I might have one.
All right, Robert. Now
Yeah.
you're breaking the rules. You're supposed to raise your hand, but I'll let you go because no one else had yet. Nope, it's okay, Robert. I'm already calling on you. We're going. Okay. Go ahead and go.
Yeah, it's my hand. So
Perfect.
good one, Jen. Sorry about that. Well, the topic of today is to create impact with UX research, or how to create impact, or to create more impact. And I was just wondering, sort of, what is your view on using actually footage from when you do interviews with respondents, and using those quotes and highlights in reports? Because my experience is here that that creates a lot of impact for we are an agency, but for our clients to actually see the customer telling something about their experience, or how they experience certain journeys. And so we use a lot of videos in our reporting. So I was just wondering, sort of, how do you look on using those type of tools to create more impact with research?
Great. Thanks, Robert. Anybody have any response to that? Experience with that?
I think I would say that it's a great way to engender empathy, like you said. I in my experience, you have to watch out for PII. We used to, working in ed tech, we had a lot of interviews conducted with teachers and minors, and especially when you're conducting interviews with minors, you have to worry about privacy. I don't know if that is your case or not. The other thing I think I think something to keep in mind is the culture of your organization. Depending on how fast paced you are, maybe the using videos in your segments can be looked at as, at least it was in my experience, as sort of shirking your responsibility as a UX researcher to represent or act as a proxy for your users. They didn't want to watch the video and have to think about the user's experience themselves. They wanted us to report out what the users were saying. I'm not generally in favor of that, but that is kind of part of the culture of your organization. So it can reflect poorly on you depending on who you're talking to. And it's also worth keeping in mind that some people are less empathetic than others.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Sean. I've seen some videos where they're kind of like, yeah, and I mean, I think for the product teams, they don't really know what to do with that data. And I think it's still really important to connect the dots for them. Like, some people just are not fully in the mindset to really make the connections. And you're like, okay, so they said this is how we're gonna, what's your recommendation based on that? You really have to tie those threads across that sometimes for some people. Anybody else have any thoughts on video or experience?
It seems to me that doing the research is easy. Getting it consumed by the organization is the hard part, because most people don't want to read research reports. Only people really want to read them are other researchers. So I think any way you can make a difference and cut through the noise, the better it is. And you can probably get that permission in your consent form in the beginning. You could put it in there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Apama, I wasn't sure if you had another question or if you were answering. So sorry that I wasn't ignoring your hand. I wasn't sure if you had another question or you were responding. So
I was responding. Sorry.
Okay.
I think I agree to some of the points, but also consent. And for users, I think it's important to show the videos, especially for usability tests, usability problems, but also in discovery to make users, stakeholders understand what is the end goal users are trying to get. And therefore, it kind of helps to channel the stakeholders' mindset to not just creating new features, but also from the user perspective. I think one of the important things is consent. Yes, we take it, but how long are we keeping it for, and how are we sharing it? Is it going to be shared across the whole world? Because in the days of social media, users are also, it's very important for them to know. The other thing is that we use the tools like online tools, interview, I don't remember the names, but some of the tools where the users are consecutively taking part in usability tests, and therefore you can see that they can tell you what exactly you want to listen. They're so used to taking part in usability tests. These are a set group of people who have registered for it. So we also have to be mindful as researchers of those biases. I think that's important for us as well, to also, again, connecting the dots and all those stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point. Anyone else have any feedback on Robert's question? Joel?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it depends on the context. So if it's going to the wider company or to people who are completely unrelated to the project, or we're just communicating out like a particular product decision, then I've used videos and I've seen them be very impactful. But if I'm showing user videos to product managers, that means that I've failed to include them within the research process, and that it's almost too late, because then they're like just receiving my information rather than having been part of that discovery process. Obviously, it's not always easy to get them involved because they have their own time limits and whatnot, but I try my best to get them involved in those interviews so that they also become champions of what the users are saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's great. I think I completely agree. When you have people listening in and joining in the user sessions, what you can do remotely, they can just link in on the conversations and see what it's about. That's way more powerful than a short clip of 1 minute. And I don't know, yeah, if people use remote research platforms a lot, but I do that, and a lot of people can join in. So I think if you have a lot of stakeholders, that can really help get them more involved in the whole empathy and the research what you're conducting. So
Yeah, that's a good point, Robert. I will say, like, I've seen some video highlight reels that feel a little bit overwhelming because there's so much context switching and it's a different person. It can be a little bit too much to just like have a 4 or 5 minute content reel and be like, wait, okay, so this person said what about what? You know, it's not always one-to-one, like this was the question, here's what they're saying. So be mindful of the cognitive load that context switching can have when you do a highlight reel. I've suffered from it, seeing someone else's highlight reels. So just something to think about. Kinsey?
I was just curious if anyone here has done a study with people in their organization so that they are the subjects of the UX study for internal purposes, so that they understand what it is, like what we actually do, and give them insight into processes that they're engaged with.
Clara, were you going to answer that, or you?
No, I'm just curious
Oh.
if anyone has. It seems like it'd be a way. It seems like it would be a way of, hopefully demonstrating, what the process is, and so maybe how something that came out of it would be useful. Although if they didn't, then it may backfire. But I think that's something that I would be interested in doing as a consultant, is to kind of frame something that way. Not for, I don't know. I'm just thinking about this for the first time. So, but working with clients on organizational culture, for example, I can see myself doing that, taking a similar approach to UX study, thinking of them as the users, to kind of show them, what the process, how it informs the processes internally and with them specifically. So maybe it would give some insight into the value of research. Just thoughts.
Sean? You're muted.
Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I have for internal tools, for the development of internal tools, but we weren't measuring specifically the impact of learning more about the UX research process on the people that we were conducting the UX research with. It was more about developing internal tools, but I have done internal studies before.
Yeah. One thing that like a little red flag that pops into my head when you say that, Kinsey, is we don't want them to think they're the user. So by putting them in that kind of pseudo user role when they're really not, can make them detach themselves from being the user later, because they're like, what, I did the research, I know exactly what this is like. And you don't really want to make that connection for them. It's like, no, you're not the user. You know how the sausage is made, too much. So there could be a little caution just kind of went in my head a little bit. I don't know, it depends on the organization and if the people actually are the user, or can suspend that belief. But I know that's a challenge we often have, is like, no, you're not the user, and getting people to not be in that, in that mindset.
Mm-hmm. I think it's one of those things where, between us, would use the term user, but like in, a wider framework, I wouldn't use that. And I'm thinking of Indy Young said something recently where she uses the term user just within this community or some context of a presentation, but she knows that that's not a word that she would use when talking to people about the research. And so it was just kind of a shorthand for us internally, us being, UX researchers or whatnot. But it may position people in a particular way and register as a different way that isn't desirable. So that what you say makes sense and kind of makes me think of what Indy said.
Anybody else have any other thoughts? I'm with you, Sean. I've done a lot of internal employee research, but it's been they were the user of the tool or whatnot. It's been internal tools. So I think that's a little different than what you're talking about, Kinsey. Kristen?
Yeah, Kinsey, were you referring to like a interviewing, what was, I can't think of the word, but going through internally and just interviewing and checking the temperature of everyone in your company, seeing if they understand what you do and how you can help them and what exactly your impact is. There's a lot of information out there. I think it's called like a listening tour or interviewing tour of your company.
Stakeholder interviews. Yeah.
Yeah. And even going as far as talking to individual help desk and customer service team members, because they're talking to the end users every day. Just getting their feedback and asking the questions that we as user researchers ask that may have never crossed a stakeholder's mind. What would happen if we didn't change anything? And they're like, oh. So it's kind of funny. It's interesting getting those complex questions in their brain.
Yeah, it's a way of kind of doing user research without calling it that and without drawing attention to it. And a lot of times, if you name something and call it out, it loses its power and utility. And so and it also, like, it's an opportunity for relationship building and trust building, which has a lot of value. And this goes to what Nikki was saying, ask the people like how you can help them reach their goals. And it's also an opportunity because that makes it a dialogue. And so you can present your work in response to what they say. So it's more organic and not just conveying information. It's actually personal. So listening tour. I like that term.
I definitely do stakeholder interviews when I'm joining a project. And one of the questions is, how do you feel, or what's your experience with research? That's a great way to gauge how, what biases they have, what negativity they had for that. What's your experience? Have you worked with a researcher in the past? No. What do you expect it to be like? I definitely do those kind of stakeholder interviews whenever I'm joining a project.
That's nice too, because even if they have, different researchers do research in different ways. And that's something that I'm conscious of because I've done researched in a different domain and in focusing in a different continent, and have had complete control over my methods and my strategy without taking and being very responsive to the environment and conditions and subject matter. And so that's going to be much different if I work with someone that's used to working with people that come out of UX research training. And so I like the idea of doing stakeholder interviews to see what they expect and then talk about, the personal approach.
Yeah,
But
I
it's
mean, it helps
also
to know
important.
who's been burned or not, if
Yeah,
nothing else. Like
totally,
you'll know
totally.
who your hostilities are
Yeah, and
potentially could
distinguish
be coming
yourself.
from. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. All right, we're gonna wrap up with Clara's question. Clara.
Yeah, mine's kind of a throwback to it's tangential to Robert's from earlier, but for when you are sharing the insights from research, someone had made a comment of like not everyone wants to read the research reports. So I'm curious, what do people find as being efficient or effective for getting those insights adopted and understood by stakeholders you're working at? Particularly in my context, I'm in a designer/researcher role, so sometimes I'm the one who's driving forward with the design, and I have a very clear idea of like, oh, this is what we'll do. But before we can prioritize that, I have to get my product manager and stakeholders on board. And I find that that can be challenging sometimes when you do the research, the insights are clear to you. And if they weren't as involved throughout, or they weren't as involved in synthesis, how do you like get other people on board into that? Do you still find research reports to be the best at communicating the nuance? Do you find slides are better for getting those bullet points out, memos, or yeah, just sharing the affinity diagram directly, even if other people didn't work on it? Yeah, like what's helpful?
Anybody have any thoughts?
I think I can go on it. I involved the whole team from the start and including stakeholders. And I kind of run a workshop. And in as much as we talked about the stakeholder interviews, you know what is expected of you, but also putting your position clear that what can be expected from you, so that it can kind of midpoint between business needs and user needs, kind of, I see that as. And also involving them in the whole session, like in involving the marketing team, the customer experience team, the developers, PM, everybody in the whole research process, I think helps a lot more in changing the mindset and having bigger impact. And then they also understand, and as Nikki said earlier, the more you do discovery and explain what the end goal is, then it makes the company also understand that, if they are doing OKR, what the prioritization should be against the user journey map, what is it that we are meeting the user needs and goals. And I think that helps me a lot in doing this whole involvement throughout the company, and one-to-one coffee chats are one of my best techniques to do that also.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, do you ever run into challenges where, like, if you're working with stakeholders who are tight on time, like maybe they're not able to participate, like in the sessions themselves, but then there's still someone who needs to understand what the learnings are? Is
I
that
make
a pain
an
point?
Excel sheet and give them the time so that they can put in when they can, or
Okay.
put in a link, take a consent from the user and say, even if it's 5 minutes, just see this bit. I kind of try and tell them where to look. That is their core interest, and that I understand from the stakeholder interviews, and then try and slowly go, because I respect that everybody is busy, and asking too much time off them is also not fair for me. So it's kind of trying to help them out as well, and trying to tell them, okay, this is what you were talking about in that session, I heard in that meeting, maybe you should look into this user, and he had something, or she had something, or they had something interesting to say. And that kind of helps them manage their time as well, rather than telling them, okay, watch this 45 minutes interview.
That makes a lot of sense. That's super helpful.
Thanks.
Also, Clara, I would say kind of figure out how they like to digest the information. Are they video people? Are they visual people? Do they like spreadsheets? I mean, who knows? Like there are people out there that like info in a spreadsheet. So kind of get some feels like what we're, when you're in a meeting with them, what reports they're looking at, and what's working with them and what's not.
That makes a lot of sense. We have a challenger, like we have Confluence, which is like in our org, everyone's using Confluence, and like the org likes Confluence, but even within the individual stakeholders, sometimes there are people where they have preferences, but then it always still has to end up in Confluence because that's where the org has it established. So sometimes there's some duplicated work if, oh, they want to see it in a mural board, but then it eventually has to be linked in Confluence, and then other people who need to see it, maybe they need an outline, they need it linear. They don't like mural boards because it's too
It can be
scattered for
yellow.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I will
it
say
is.
one more little thing. An executive summary helps. At the very beginning, here's the highlights. And also I put like a why it matters. Why does this matter? Because honestly, kind of to what Sean was saying earlier, like you have to connect those dots. They just don't, or they'll connect them wrong sometimes because they're like, wait, but I was here to look about the conversion button. You're like, yeah, I know, but I got other stuff here that I need you to see because this happened as well. They could be so focused on they want one thing answered, but you have some insights on some other things. So really showing that why it matters, what's the impact, like if you don't listen, what could be the problems can be really helpful too.
You gotta synthesize it down so all the big ideas are on one page. As when Jen said executive summary, I've seen 4-page executive summary. That's not an executive summary.
No.
It's got to be one page, and it takes time to synthesize it down and boil those big ideas to the top. But you have to remember, as researchers, we often think the research is the end, but research is actually a means to an end, and somebody else is paying us to do the research for a greater goal, and you got to stick with that.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, well, I got to get back to work because it's the middle of my day, so I better show back up. But thank you all for hanging out at happy hour. I hope you make some new connections and friends. And
totally did. Thanks, Jen.
You bet. We'll see you at the next event. Have a good afternoon,
Thank
morning,
you.
evening,
Bye.
wherever you are.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.